and the Eagles like they were destined for greatness. But the truth? Dozens of bands in the 1960s had the same spark, the same magic, even the same shot at immortality. So, why do we only remember a few? What about the bands who burned just as bright but crashed just as fast? Let's rewind and rediscover 20 forgotten groups that could have been as big as the legends we know today. Number 20. The Box Tops. In 1967, the Box Tops came out of Memphis with a sound that changed music. They started as a band called the DeVilles, but changed their name when their song The Letter became a huge hit. The song was short, catchy, and unforgettable. But what made it special was Alex Chilton's voice. At just 16 years old, Alex had a rough, soulful tone that sounded like it belonged to someone much older. His voice was so full of emotion that people compared the band to the Righteous Brothers, saying they were a white group that sang like they came straight out of black soul music. The band worked hard, but faced big challenges early on. By 1968, two members, John Evans and Danny Smythe, left to go back to school. New members Rick Allen and Tom Boggs joined, and the band kept going. They were incredibly busy, releasing 3 albums in less than a year. While this made them popular, it also wore them out. Things got worse in 1969 when the band started having trouble with the music industry. During a tour in London, they were asked to play with broken equipment left by another group. It was embarrassing and frustrating. By 1970, the remaining original members, Alex Chilton and Gary Talley, decided to end the band. Even though their time together was short, the Box Tops showed the world how soul and rock could come together in a powerful way. Number 19. Jay and the Americans. Jay and the Americans are one of the most unique bands in music history. Over the years, they had 3 different lead singers, each bringing something new to the group. The first was Jay Traynor, who sang with the band from 1960 to 1962. Then came Jay Black, whose deep, powerful voice became the band's most famous sound. Finally, Jay Reinke joined years later to carry on their legacy. The band had an amazing run, with 12 top 10 hits between 1962 and 1971. They didn't just make great music, they also broke new ground. Legendary songwriters Lieber and Stoller, who worked with Elvis Presley, signed Jay and the Americans as the first white group they directly worked with. Songs like Come a Little Bit Closer and This Magic Moment made them unforgettable. Even with different singers, the band stayed true to their unique sound and left a lasting mark on music. Number 18. The McCoys. The McCoys started in a small town called Union City, Indiana. The band was led by Rick Derringer, who was just a teenager back then. Their big break came by chance when they were spotted while playing backup for another group, the Strangeloves. Producers were looking for a young band that looked like the Beatles to record a new song. The McCoys got the job, and that song was Hang On Sloopy. Hang On Sloopy became a massive hit in 1965. It even knocked the Beatles' Yesterday off the top of the charts. Suddenly, the McCoys were famous. As time went on, they tried new styles of music, moving from fun pop songs to more serious rock. In 1970, they worked with blues legend Johnny Winter as his backing band for the album Johnny Winter And. Even though they didn't get credit for it, this showed how talented and versatile they were. Number 17. The Classics 4. The story of the Classics 4 feels like a roller coaster. It all started in Jacksonville, Florida, in the 1960s. Back then, they weren't even called the Classics 4. They started as Leroy and the Moments, and changed names a few times before settling on one. Their big break came in the strangest way. They found a jazz instrumental called Spooky, played by a saxophonist named Mike Sharp. The band decided to add lyrics to it, and just like that, they had a hit. By February 1968, Spooky was everywhere, climbing to number 3 on the Billboard charts. This was just the start. Over the next year and a half, they released 3 massive hits: Spooky, Stormy, and Traces. Their music mixed soft rock and jazz, something that made them stand out. They got so big, they went on the Zoo Tour, sharing the stage with legends like the Turtles and the Byrds. But life wasn't kind to them forever. Dennis Yost, their lead singer, was the heart and soul of the band. In 2006, he suffered a terrible accident. He fell down a flight of stairs and hit his head, leaving him with severe brain injuries. Friends and musicians came together to help, including members of the Moody Blues and Three Dog Night. But despite their efforts, Dennis passed away on December 7, 2008. Strangely, it was exactly 40 years since Stormy hit the top 10. Number 16. The Buckinghams. The Buckinghams came from Chicago, but you'd never guess it from their name. They wanted to sound British. After all, British bands were ruling the music world in the 1960s. They used to be called the Pulsations, but someone at a TV station suggested the name the Buckinghams. It worked like magic. By 1967, they were being called the most listened to band in America. Their biggest hit was Kind of a Drag, a song they released in December 1966. Nobody expected it to blow up, but it became the first #1 song of 1967 and stayed at the top for 2 weeks. Here's the funny part. They didn't even have another song ready when it happened. They were so unprepared for their success. But then, things started going wrong. Their producer, James William Guercio, thought it would be cool to add a weird psychedelic section to their song Susan, copying the Beatles. It backfired. Radio stations didn't want to play it. Then came a scandal. Their roadies got arrested, and people thought the band was involved in drugs. They weren't. These problems, mixed with disagreements about their music, led to the band breaking up in 1970. Number 15. The Beau Brummels. The Beau Brummels were Americans, but you'd never know it from how they were marketed. They wore sharp suits, sang in a British pop style, and fooled a lot of people into thinking they were from across the pond. It was a smart move, considering the British invasion was taking over. They were discovered in a little club in San Mateo, California, by 2 radio DJs, Tom Donahue and Bobby Mitchell, who helped launch their career. Their first hit was Laugh, Laugh, released in December 1964. It was produced by Sylvester Stewart, who would later become famous as Sly Stone. The song reached number 15 on the Billboard charts in early 1965, and it made them the first successful rock band from San Francisco. They were ahead of their time, mixing folk rock with the upbeat sound of British pop, even before bands like the Byrds did. They even became pop culture icons. In 1965, they appeared on the Flintstones as the Beau Brummels Tones, playing a fun parody of a rock band. This was during the height of Beatlemania, and their appearance cemented their place in music history. Number 14. The Fortunes. The Fortunes started in 1960 in Birmingham, England, when school friends Rodney Bainbridge and Barry Pritchard decided to form a band. They got their big break when a music promoter named Reg Calvert discovered them. Things were going well until tragedy struck. On June 21, 1966, their manager, Calvert, was shot and killed in a fight about pirate radio stations. This shocking event happened at the home of a man named Major Oliver Smedley and caused a huge scandal in the music world. The Fortunes also revealed something surprising about their music. They admitted they didn't play the instruments on their hit songs. Instead, top musicians like Jimmy Page, who would later join Led Zeppelin, played for them. The band only sang the vocals. Rod Allen, one of the members, said they never tried to hide this secret. Despite all this, the Fortunes became very popular. Their song, "You've Got Your Troubles," was a hit in 1965 and made them famous internationally. They even toured with big bands like the Moody Blues during the British invasion in America. Later, they became the voices behind Coca-Cola's famous ad song, "It's the Real Thing," in 1969. This mix of success and controversy made their story unforgettable. Number 13. Arthur Brown. Arthur Brown was a rock star unlike anyone else. He wanted to shock people, and he did just that. Before becoming famous with his band The Crazy World of Arthur Brown, he was briefly with the Foundations. He left them before they had their big hit Build Me Up Buttercup because he had a different vision. On stage, Arthur Brown was unforgettable. He painted his face in wild colors and even set his head on fire using a special helmet. His performances were so crazy that they sometimes caused riots. At one show, the chaos got so bad that the club owner paid the band to leave early to avoid violence. Their first album, co-produced by Pete Townshend of The Who, had a rock opera about sin and temptation. Despite his wild stage act, Arthur was a deeply religious man and even studied philosophy. The band played with legends like Jimi Hendrix and The Doors. But things didn't last. Arthur was sued for allegedly copying the tune of their hit Fire, and the band fell apart during a U.S. tour. Two members, Vincent Crane and Carl Palmer, left to form another band called Atomic Rooster. Although the band didn't last long, Arthur's fiery performances influenced many artists who came after him. Number 12. The Left Banke. The Left Banke had a dramatic and emotional story. Their hit song, Walk Away Renee, was inspired by real heartbreak. Michael Brown, one of the band members, wrote it about Renee Fladen-Kam, the girlfriend of another bandmate, Tom Finn. Michael was secretly in love with Renee and used his feelings to create the song, but it caused tension within the band. Another part of their story stayed hidden for years. Their original drummer, Lisa David Shirehorst, was a transgender woman and bisexual. At the time, she was known as Warren, but she was forced out of the band by Michael's father, Harry Lukowski, who managed them. This part of their history was not widely known until much later. The band's problems didn't stop there. They split into two rival groups, both claiming to be the Left Banke. One version even had Michael McKean, who would later become famous for movies like This Is Spinal Tap. Fans got confused and frustrated, and some even organized a boycott. This hurt the band's success and ended their rise to fame. Number 11. The Cyrkle. The Cyrkle started as a college band called the Rondells in Easton, Pennsylvania. Their big break came in 1965 when Nathan Weiss, a partner of the Beatles' manager Brian Epstein, discovered them. Weiss introduced the band to Epstein, who helped guide their early career. Even better, John Lennon himself came up with their new name, The Cyrkle, inspired by a roundabout in their hometown. In 1966, they hit it big with Red Rubber Ball, a cheerful pop tune that became a massive success. It sold over 1 million copies and climbed to number 2 on the Billboard Hot 100. Paul Simon wrote the song to make some quick cash while living in England, and its catchy melody became unforgettable. The Cyrkle's clever stereo recording of the track added depth, splitting the instruments and vocals across channels for a crisp, clean sound. The highlight of their career was opening for the Beatles during their final U.S. tour in 1966. They played at 14 shows, including the historic concerts at Dodger Stadium and Candlestick Park, the latter being the Beatles' last paid performance. Despite these incredible opportunities, the Cyrkle's fame didn't last, but their brief connection to one of the greatest bands in history makes their story unforgettable. Number 10. Spiral Staircase. Spiral Staircase's journey to fame started in an unexpected place, an Air Force talent contest in 1964. Back then, they were called the Fidalians, but when Columbia Records signed them, they insisted on a new name. Following the trend of quirky spellings like the Beatles, they became Spiral Staircase. Their big moment came in 1969 with the release of More Today Than Yesterday. Written by their lead singer, Pat Upton, the song was inspired by a gig they had in Las Vegas. It became a huge hit, reaching number 12 on the Billboard Hot 100 and selling over 1 million copies. Their one and only album, named after the song, featured covers of popular tracks like Proud Mary and This Guy's in Love with You. Even though their fame was short-lived, More Today Than Yesterday is still loved today. Spiral Staircase may have been a one-hit wonder, but their hit has stood the test of time. Number 9. The Flying Machine. The Flying Machine has one of the strangest stories in music history, because there were actually 2 bands with the same name. One included James Taylor before his solo career took off. But the band that became famous was a different group entirely. Known for their 1969 hit, Smile a Little Smile for Me. When James Taylor's earlier recordings were released later, the new band had to call themselves the original Flying Machine to avoid confusion. Smile a Little Smile for Me was written by Jeff Stevens and Tony McCauley. It became a huge success, reaching number 5 on the US charts and number 4 in Canada. The soft melody and emotional lyrics struck a chord with listeners. Rumor has it, the song was inspired by a poem written in 1968, but no one knows for sure. Despite their one big hit, the Flying Machine couldn't keep the momentum going. Still, their song remains a classic, remembered as a sweet and simple gem from the late 60s. Number 8. 4 Jacks and a Jill. 4 Jacks and a Jill started their journey in 1964 during a time of hardship in apartheid South Africa. They weren't always called that. At first, they were the Nevadas, known for being one of South Africa's first bands with long hair. Then they changed their name to the Zombies, not the famous British band. But when Glenys Lynn joined as their lead singer, they finally became 4 Jacks and a Jill. In 1967, they had their first big hit with a song called Timothy. It was so popular that it earned South Africa's first gold disc, meaning it sold as well as hit songs in the rest of the world. A year later, in 1968, they released their most famous song, Master Jack. On the surface, it was just a simple story about a mine worker breaking free from his boss. But many people believed it was secretly criticizing South Africa's government and its strict apartheid rules. Some even thought the Master Jack in the song was a reference to the country's prime minister at the time. Master Jack became a massive hit, not just in South Africa, but all over the world. It reached number 1 in Canada, Australia, and several other countries. In the US, it made it to number 18 on the Billboard Hot 100. However, things didn't always go smoothly for the band. Trini Lopez, a famous singer, wanted to record Master Jack and own the rights to the song outside of South Africa. The band's label agreed, leaving 4 Jacks and a Jill feeling cheated out of their chance for international fame. Still, they made history back home by having 3 songs on the charts at the same time: Timothy, Master Jack, and I Looked Back. Number 7. The Rose Garden. The Rose Garden story is about a band that had a quick rise and an even quicker fall. They started in Los Angeles in 1964, calling themselves the Blokes. Back then, they were known for playing songs by the Byrds so well that even one of the Byrds said, "You do our music better than we do." Things took a strange turn when the band was hired to pretend to be another group called the Giant Sunflower. They played someone else's hit song, February Sunshine, at live shows. Later, when Diana DeRose joined the group, they became the Rose Garden. Their big break came with the song Next Plane to London, which became famous for its real airport announcement sounds in the background. The song did well, and the band seemed to be on their way to bigger things. But problems began when they worked on their second single, If My World Falls Through. Without telling the band, their managers replaced Jim Groshong's vocals with Diana's version of the song. This caused a lot of tension. Jim left the band, and things quickly fell apart, even though they were still on tour. Their time in the spotlight was over almost as quickly as it began. Number 6. Jimmy Gilmer and the Fireballs. Jimmy Gilmer and the Fireballs created one of the catchiest songs of 1963, Sugar Shack. Its creation came from an unexpected place. Songwriter Keith McCormick was stuck on the lyrics and asked his aunt, Faye Voss, for help. She suggested the word leotards to describe the tight pants girls wore back then, and that's how the song came together. The band recorded the song at Norman Petty Studios in New Mexico, the same studio where Buddy Holly made his hits. The unique sound of Sugar Shack came from a special keyboard called the Hammond Solavox, which gave the song its signature style. Sugar Shack became a huge hit. It was the #1 song in America for 5 weeks and was named Billboard's top song of the entire year. The Fireballs also hold a special place in history. They were the last American band to have a big hit before the Beatles took over with Beatlemania. Even today, Sugar Shack remains a classic. It's been featured in movies like Forrest Gump and Congo, keeping its charm alive for new generations. Number 5. The T-Bones. In the 1960s, there was a band called the T-Bones. But here's the twist. There wasn't just one T-Bones band, there were 3. It all started in 1964 when a group of talented musicians, including Leon Russell and Glenn Campbell, got together to record 2 albums about cars and beaches. Things got really interesting when their song, No Matter What Shape, Your Stomach's In, became a huge hit in 1966. The song, based on an Alka-Seltzer jingle, climbed to number 3 on the charts. But there was a secret. The musicians who recorded the hit weren't even the original band. Instead, it was recorded by another group called the Wrecking Crew, made up of legendary session players like Hal Blaine and Carol Kaye. When the song blew up, the record label realized they didn't have a band to perform it. Their solution? They created a new group of random musicians and sent them out as the T-Bones. This version of the band toured and promoted the song, even though they hadn't played a single note on the hit. Strange, right? Number 4. The Seeds. The Seeds were a band that almost didn't happen. In 1965, Sky Saxon was desperate to find a keyboard player. He called up Rick Andridge, who was just days away from leaving town. Luckily, Rick said yes, and the Seeds were born. Their name has a funny backstory. After one of their shows, a DJ called them Seedy. At first, they were offended, but then they decided to own it. People later thought the name had something to do with flower power or marijuana, but it was just a joke. The Seeds had a rough, raw sound that inspired punk and garage bands for years to come. Even though they weren't chart-topping stars, they made a big impact. Their 1967 album Future was so ahead of its time that it influenced artists like Iggy Pop and even the Beach Boys. Number 3. Mercy. Mercy's story is one of the strangest in music history. It started in Tampa, Florida, when a high schooler named Jack Sigler Jr. wrote a love song for his girlfriend. That song, Love Can Make You Happy, became a huge hit in 1969, reaching number 2 on the charts. But while the song was taking off, Jack was called to naval duty. This left an opening for the record label to do something sneaky. They created a fake version of Mercy, complete with an album featuring models on the cover who had nothing to do with the music. This led to 2 versions of the band, one real, one fake, both releasing albums with the same hit song. Warner Brothers eventually had to re-record the track with Jack's real band to settle unpaid royalties. The whole situation was a mess, and Jack left so quickly for the Navy that he didn't even appear in any of the band's photos. Number 2. The Peppermint Rainbow. The Peppermint Rainbow started in Baltimore in 1967, but back then they were called the New York Times. When they signed with Decca Records in 1968, they changed their name and their sound. At the heart of the group were 2 sisters, Bonnie and Patty Lambden, whose voices gave the band a sweet, sunny vibe. Their big hit, Will You Be Staying After Sunday, was a cheerful tune with a little edge in its lyrics. It spent 14 weeks on the charts, reaching number 32, and sold over 1 million copies. Despite their wholesome image, the song hinted at the era's changing views on relationships. On TV, they had a quirky style. When they appeared on The Generation Gap in 1969, their instruments weren't even plugged in. Like many bands of the time, they were lip-syncing to the music. Their next song, Don't Wake Me Up in the Morning, Michael, did okay, but couldn't match their earlier success. After that, the band quietly faded away. Number 1. The Outsiders. The Outsiders started in Cleveland as a group called the Starfires. Their breakthrough came with the hit Time Won't Let Me, which blended rock and R&B into a catchy sound. But their story wasn't all happy. Guitarist Al Austin died in a car accident when he was just 19, which deeply affected the band. As they became more popular, their management pushed them to change their gritty, hometown style to fit the California flower power vibe. Fans didn't love the change, and the band's popularity started to fade. Things got messier with legal fights. Lead singer Sonny Garassi tried to keep the band going under the same name, which led to a lawsuit with another band member. Sonny eventually started a new group called Climax, which had a hit with Precious and Few in 1972. Tragically, Sonny's career ended after a brain aneurysm in 2012, and he passed away in 2017.